To see the, rockets on top of your head and the interceptors trying to get them is your wake-up call, okay? This is real. And we've seen children being bombed in 4K on Instagram and then swipe through it.
I don't think people understand the repercussions of these decisions.
Calm is a better way of execution.
It's important not to lose our humanity in the process.
I can genuinely tell you that one of the things that parents should do instead of trying to explain the situation to their little kids is...
Hi, and welcome to a special episode of With Loulou. It's been a while, and I didn't expect this to be the conversation that would bring me back. But the recent aggression facing the Gulf has made this conversation very necessary. Since the war began, I've been in countless WhatsApp groups with executives, founders, investors, moms and dads, all trying to make sense of what is happening, assessing risk, protecting their families, staying sane, and finding ways to make smart decisions in very uncertain times. So I invited friend of the podcast, Mo Gawdat. Mo is not only a brilliant technologist and former Google X executive, he also has spent years studying stress, the mind, and how human beings respond under pressure. He is also fearless in his way of explaining the situation and how he views it. While many of us are asking how bad this thing can get and when it will end, there's another question we need to ask. What is all of this doing to our brains? War is not only physical, it is also psychological. So how do we cope intelligently?
You're growing like 200-300% in the early years.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be an entrepreneur.
So I'm definitely an emerging market junkie. I like to go to the frontier.
Okay. Give us the meat, Abdullah.
You need to be able to make the sacrifices that are required for this journey.
Take pride in your job. This too shall pass.
Yes.
So Mo, I'm so happy that you're here.
Happy is a good thing at this time. Thank you for having me.
This is a special episode that we thought, let's have this conversation. Given what's happening now around us, the aggression that the Gulf is facing at this point in time, we were thrown into the midst of an ugly war. And the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because obviously as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a mother, I think like many people in Dubai, we've been on our WhatsApp groups that have been going on fire. Mm-hmm. And I'm on multiple groups, by the way. So I'm on groups for founders and investors. I'm on groups with like the community where I live. And I think everyone is trying to make sense of it all. Including myself. So you have studied the brain for a long time.
Not at war, but yes.
For a decade.
Yeah.
You've written books around the topics of stress and happiness and so on. You're also an executive. You've also managed companies and managed teams at the highest levels, maybe not through crisis like this. You're a father. So I felt it would be relevant to have a conversation with you, around the situation, not necessarily a political one, but more of a crisis management one, right? When things are eerily close to us, when we felt that war is very abstract. It happens to people
on the screen, huh?
In other places.
Yeah, it's understood that that everyone in this situation, we're designed as a survival machine. So every one of us in this situation is attempting to run away from the tiger, if you want, right? Unfortunately, the tiger is inside your head. It's not in front of you. So to be able to give shape and volume to the tiger, you keep incessant thinking all the time. I want to start by the idea of the war being somewhere else, mm-hmm. Another address, and I know people will find that really interesting, but as an entrepreneur, you know that every disaster is an opportunity, right? And so I'll try to focus on the opportunities as much as I will try to cover how to deal with the confusion and the disaster and so on. But the opportunities here are immense. A very interesting one is that for many, many years, we've suffered what is normally known as hypernormalization of reality. So hypernormalization of reality is that the media and the propaganda machine basically makes you believe that certain things that are not supposed to be part of our life are very normal. It's absolutely okay for killing to happen as long as it's on the screen and there is a lot of noise around, around ideology and democracy and freedom and freeing women and all of that crap. Then your brain's sort of like, this is just another movie, and it's like Rambo used to go through the jungles and kill everyone. But if that someone is an NPC, you don't know them, you don't care, and if it's someone that the movie director told you is a bad guy, you go like, yeah, they deserved it, right? None of that is true. It's all hyper-normalized in your head, right? The first thing to think about in this situation is what is reality, right? And I avoid talking about politics, and for a very long time, we've been suffering from evil outright for the last few years. Evil's always been there, but it's been explicit for the last few years. And we've seen children being bombed in 4K on Instagram, right? And somehow, some people are able to watch that when they're having lunch and then swipe through it.
Put a like on it.
And put a like on it, right? Now, that hyper-normalization of reality is not a coincidence. It's a very, very intricate plan. And I'll say openly that to see the rockets on top of your head and the interceptors trying to get them and some succeeding and creating a massive noise and some failing is your wake-up call, okay? This is real. And so, the acceptance of that normalization should end today, okay? You realize that you now, for the first time, have the ability to have the compassion to be in the place of those other people who feel exactly like you feel right now because they're helplessly being, attacked because of a reason that is not within their control at all.
Just a small comment on that. So I've lived through war when I was younger in Lebanon. The first 10 years of my life were in war. When I grew up, I sort of had this idea in my mind that no one who's never been through a war should start a war.
For sure.
I don't think it's so easy to say, we're gonna bomb this or that, and so on. As you said, it's morally
like
justified.
Yeah.
But living through one is incredibly terrifying, and I don't think people understand the repercussions of these decisions.
You see, it is, as I said, it is systemic. The hardening of the human heart is a systemic plan. But my first point is to say, now that you've seen it, now that you've been part of it, kickstart your compassion, okay? And kickstart your compassion with what is normally known as, metacognition. So smart people not only tell you what they know, the smartest of all of us, they tell you how they know what they knew. Okay, so if you asked me about some conclusion that I would give you, and said, but where did you get that from? I'd provide an equation or a mathematical proof or something that basically says, no, it's because of A, B, and C, and then we can discuss the facts, right? And so, if the systemic approach to our minds is to numb them through hypernormalization, then the answer to that is what is normally referred to in psychology as metacognition. And metacognition is to be able to question what you believe, right? It's to be able to tell yourself, within this time of confusion, what is the actual truth? What is the genuine reality, okay? And most people will tell you nothing is ever real, there is no truth. That's absolute crap, okay? There are quite a few truths. And knowing that something is not true is part of the truth. Do you understand that? So I want to explain that before we go back to metacognition. In my mind, for a very long time, because of the way that the system was designed around right answers and wrong answers in school, right? You tend to believe that everything is either right or wrong.
Yeah.
And that's the way the machine occupies your mind. They try to convince you that if something with a subset within a superset is wrong, and we focus enough on it, you'll believe that the superset is wrong, right? So in my mind, there were two compartments, right or wrong, true or false, black or white, okay? And a lot of people will tell you there is grayscale. Yeah, that's philosophically beautiful. I have in my brain, I have something I call compartment 2, okay? And so, in a lot of things, most things, you do not know if it's right or wrong, okay? Because it's not 100% right, or it's not 100% wrong, or because you don't have enough information, or because you cannot achieve a scientific enough proof or a factual enough proof, right? Now, the problem with the world that we live in is that we get distracted from the truth, not by limiting what we see, but by overwhelming us with what we see, right? So at any point in time, if you wanna ask yourself the simple question here of who's the good guys and who's the bad guys, that level of metacognition is the moment where you wake up. And for most of us, the last 11, 12 days have been your wake-up call, right? So here is what happens in metacognition. You cannot start to find the truth by sifting through all of the input that comes to you, right?
I tried.
It's impossible. As a matter of fact, that leads you to media fatigue, and you basically, and that's part of the distraction strategy,
The
right?
fog of war.
Yeah. So I told you I'm working on 2 books at the same time, and I also want to work on a third one called propaganda, which basically explains the tactics, right, that propaganda uses. One of the very interesting ways is ask yourself today, how often do you look at something related to Gaza?
Not much. Not
Correct.
as much as obviously I used to 3 years ago and 2 years ago.
Correct. Is that because the people of Gaza stopped suffering?
No, absolutely not.
Correct. What happened is that the machine got you to a moment of fatigue where the minute they gave you an out by saying, there is a ceasefire that is, broken 1,600 times so far, we forget.
Yeah.
Right? We forget and we move on to the next thing. If you want to genuinely be not only an authentic, enlightened, but also intelligent person, you want to tell yourself, where do I know the crap that I know from? Okay? And so you start vetting through the truth, not from the input, but from the conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay? So you take any concept that you've agreed to put in compartment 1, true, or compartment 3, false, okay? And then you tell yourself, how did I agree to that? Oh, so that word, the shiny headline that affected me to believe in this crap, okay, is not true at all, right? And I know this is a very demanding process, right? Because it requires you to reflect on every concept that you've ever believed, and it may take you the hours or days to actually find where you got that concept from.
Yeah.
And then you can finally start to say, hold on. I'm going to revisit this one. So give me the actual data. To simplify things to the very bare minimum. First, the very, very, very bare truth is usually very simple, okay? You find that first, and then you build on top of it again with data, rather than the propaganda that erased your mind or shaped your mind.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the current situation at hand, where
Correct.
where again, I think a lot of us were thrown into this. What you're saying is, go back to your own beliefs and question your own beliefs. Figure out where do these beliefs come from.
Yeah.
It's okay to have opposing ideas, I guess, in your mind as well.
Keep those in compartment too.
Because one is the truth, three is not true.
Yeah, one is true, the other is false, and the third is I don't know.
I don't know, exactly.
Okay? And I don't know is the best form of knowledge.
Okay.
Understand that. So to tell yourself, I'm not sure if it's true or false, that in itself is the ultimate form of knowledge. Because then you don't put it in either of the compartments. It's still pending for you to process it.
People are in this situation at the moment. Never ever did anyone living here in the UAE or in Dubai think that this will happen here. And then again, there's a lot of chaos around it.
Yeah.
People process things differently. So as a founder, business owner, mother, father, what is the recommendation here? So obviously you're inundated with news and interpretations and explanations and so on. I think maybe smart people tend to think, the more I read, the more I educate myself, the more maybe I can
targeted reading I read.
Yeah, but I think
very different.
You're trying to cast the net wide as well, because you want to try to get different points of view. At least that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I believe that's actually one of the reasons why you would be stressed.
Okay. So let's talk about that, because again, I think a lot of people are stuck in this, right? You're trying to read different narratives, trying to get signals from different places.
Yeah.
And in order to try to understand, okay, how do I live my life now? As a parent, do I leave the country? Do I stay in the country? Am I doing the right thing to protect my young kids? For me, for example, Mo, I haven't honestly been able to work all of last week.
Of course, yeah.
To me, I felt like everything is very trivial. Like the things I'm working on are very trivial in comparison to
what really matters.
Threat.
That's great.
Even though, as you said, the threat isn't really that big vis-a-vis what's in my mind. Like how many people really died here, from raining bombs and so on. So it's a different, like the reality is different. But still, I haven't really been able to function. I think a lot of people like that. And every time I see a friend of mine or like, other parents and so on, the first question they ask me is like, so what do you think is going to happen? And I think everyone's trying to get some certainty.
We can talk about that too, but it would turn very political. It's game theory really. But let's talk about the personal side first, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Right. So the interesting side of that personal side is, where do you start? Okay, so let me try to explain this the way I do it. I don't know if that's right or wrong. Remember, you're not that old, but did you ever live in the time when we wrote code and then you had what was known as memory overflow?
No, I don't know memory overflow.
So when we had very limited resources on our computers, right? The one thing that you needed to manage very, very, very clearly in the very early days was how much information do you put in the short-term memory, right? Because you basically had kbytes at the time.
Yeah.
And when you were
that I remember.
Yeah, and when you were coding and your code was producing stuff and not only your code but the operating system were producing stuff, we used to have a process that we used to call garbage collection. So you go into the memory space and clean whatever you don't need, right? Like cleaning your photographs, right, on your phone today. The human brain suffers the exact same things, right? So you have a limited compute in your brain, limited processing power. You can only crunch so much data. Some of us more than others, but you can only crunch so much data, right? And you have a memory capacity, short-term memory capacity for what you can process at the same time. You have a lot of long-term memories, but those long-term memories are not part of your current processing of a problem. Right, so you may borrow from your experience in Lebanon when you were a child and bring into your current analysis, right? But you don't use the other bits of your life in Lebanon. Great. So the idea is to go the opposite way. The idea is, if you were genuinely as an entrepreneur trying to create a strategy, what you would do is you would be presented with 80 things that seem to be concerns by your team, challenges in the marketplace, things that are changing, and so on and so forth. And then you would say, okay, we can't solve 80. What are the 3 we're going to work on first? Right? Mm-hmm. And that is the very first approach to handling the flood of information that's happening. You may actually want to swipe a little and open your horizons to the point where you find out what the 80 are, okay? But my technique is once I see something repeated 3 times, not the same reel, but the same concept of a reel, I stop, right? Because that means I'm now starting to get repetition and my incremental gain of new concepts to think about is over. But that's not the point. The point is if you take the top 1 topic to work on, you need to solve this in series, not in parallel. Mm-hmm. Because you have limited compute and limited memory, you can't solve the top 4 problems at the same time. You solve the first problem first, at least with a reasonable assumption about the other 3, right? And then you go and solve the second one, and then you go to solve the third one. I call this layering. And layering, if you want to see it in a visual way, if I gave you a ball of wool that's entangled together, mm-hmm. nobody keeps, playing with it and then suddenly goes like, here are the 7 threads, okay? Most of us would take the red thread first and then, try to take it out. And it's a very interesting exercise in terms of your cognition of how to solve problems, right? If you look at when your gold chain or something is entangled, one of my favorite hobbies is how to untangle it, because there are like 16 knots in it, but you can't solve all of the 16 knots at the same time. There are some times you can solve 2 together, but your brain cannot do more than that, mm-hmm. right? Now, what is the top problem that we need to solve? Okay, the top question one needs to ask is
today.
Yeah.
Is it safe?
For who?
For me.
Is it for you or for you and your kids?
I mean, the family, obviously.
For you and your kids and your loved ones?
Yes.
For you and your kids and your loved ones and me? Or do you not care that I'm safe? It's okay if you say no, right? But these are questions that you need to ask. Mm. And then the second question is...
Is it safe?
Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
Right, of course. Your immediate engagement, so your brain is a survival machine. The reason why we're overthinking everything is because it doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
If you get it to the point where it's safe, it will stop thinking. It will stop that incessant thinking. It will start to right? And the problem is its tendency, if you were in a jungle and a tiger is on one side and an elephant on the other side, you don't do what I'm now doing, which is saying, solve the tiger first, then the elephant, right? You just freaking panic, okay? And that's what most people are going through. I'm simply saying, look, maybe if I jump on the back of the elephant, I solve both problems at the same time. But you said your question first is, am I safe? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you, who is I? Mm-hmm. Okay? Because that's the first question, and I'll come back to it in a second. And then the second question is, in the short term or the long term?
Yeah.
Right? In the short term or the long term? Because the strategy might differ drastically between what you do in the short term to be safe, maybe go into your home, and the long term, maybe, emigrate or do whatever. Yeah. Okay? If you have those as your first problem, that's actually really easy to solve. Okay, I choose to say, is the world safe? Not am I safe? I don't think of myself as that important as compared to everyone that's suffering. Mm-hmm. Right? Are the people in Beirut today safe? Are the people in southern Lebanon safe? Are the people in Gaza safe? Are the people in Yemen safe? Are the people in Iran? Okay, the missiles that are flying on top of the UAE are Iranian missiles, right? But hundreds of children are being bombed in their schools. Everyone is, smelling smoke or inhaling smoke for the last 3 days.
Yes.
Are they safe? Okay. And I know this is very difficult for a lot of people to be in that situation and say, I want everyone to be safe, because if everyone is safe, I'll be safe, right? And remember, I always joke about this. I always say that humanity didn't survive because we're the most intelligent species on the planet. Humanity survived because we congregated in tribes. Okay, Einstein, which is in my mind one of the smartest people that ever lived, even though only 163 IQ, right? Einstein would have been eaten in the jungle in 4 minutes. It's not intelligence that kept us alive.
Yeah.
Okay, it's our
Community.
ability to be one. Okay, and be one as what? Be one as humanity is the safest way. If you look at global politics, you'd see that there are two approaches to this. And in the bigger picture, you see the Western American-led bully approach of, for my people to be safe and fat, everyone else has to suffer, okay? Or the Chinese approach that basically says, for my people to be safe and happy, okay, everyone else needs to prosper. Everyone else needs to drive fantastic cars, and they need to, to buy amazing products. And, a prosperous economy for the whole world makes my people more prosperous. And that selfishness of it's me against everyone else, or it's me because everyone else rises, is a very interesting place to think. Now, this reflects deeply on in the short term or the long term. Because if you ask me, the right answer for all of us to be safe today, like if we wanted to really be safe this minute, we would wish that this war ends right now.
Of course.
Right? I'm not in that space. Openly. Okay? I'm in the space where I want the war to end. I want the constant triggers of war that affected you in Lebanon, affected people after you left Lebanon in Lebanon, affected people in Palestine, affected people in Venezuela, affected people in Iraq. There is a systemic mistake. It's systemic. Okay? And if you want your heart to be in the right place, ask yourself, should I benefit? If God gave me a get out of jail free card and he said, you have one prayer to be answered, what would that prayer be? Should it be this war needs to end, or should it be all wars needs to end? Okay? And all wars need to end is a very different target. Now, if you ask me, we need to get to a point, genuinely, where the word war stops. Okay? And if we don't, and I'm just saying where my heart is, if we don't, then we're just going to take another 10 years breather or 5 years breather. Okay, and then your children are going to suffer that. And in my book, in Alive, the entire theme of the book is a song by a band called the Manic Street Preachers. Mm-hmm. If you tolerate this, then your children will be next. Okay, so I'm asking people to put their hearts in the right place. I'm basically saying, think about the reality of where evil is coming from. Okay. And hope that nobody gets hurt in the process, but evil needs to stop.
I think the question I always ask myself, ever since I was a child, actually, through the Lebanese war, to what obviously the most recent wars as well that have been happening around us, is why doesn't anyone care? You know what I mean? Like I remember in Lebanon back in the day, I always used to think, like, why can't anyone stop this? We like, it's just horrendous. And I feel like, as you said, war in general needs to stop. The idea of war. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but I don't see it happening because you see more and more countries buying more weapons and developing more harmful weapons and stronger weapons and so on.
So what can you do?
How can I maybe shield my mind, Muhammad, from maybe...
I'm not asking you to shield your mind. I'm asking you to clear your mind.
Yeah. No, by shield, not mean like I don't want to know what's going on. By shield, I meant so that you don't become more hardened.
Correct.
And you don't become more inhumane, and you lose your humanity, and you think they should all die. You know what I mean?
Nobody should die. That's the statement I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm saying nobody should die. Even the people that started this war.
Yeah.
Okay, they should be held accountable and prosecuted.
They should be held accountable. Correct.
Yeah, but the point is. They shouldn't die. If someone goes and shoots one of the politicians tomorrow, I wouldn't feel good about that. Justice is for the world to have an order, a form of order. Okay? And you can easily see. I told you, you can change things when you see something wrong. Try to change it with your actions. I don't think either of us can can do actions that change anything. With your words, that's what I'm trying to do right now, right? With my writing, with my sharing openly what's in my heart. Could be wrong. It doesn't matter, but I'm sharing it, okay? Or with your heart. And what I'm asking people to do is to start for the first time, because now the compassion of being in the situation that you saw on the screen when you pressed a like, okay? Now you're in that situation, is create the compassion in your heart to say, no one should ever suffer that. My children or any children in the world should not live under a sky where there are rockets flying by, okay? And I think that statement is where our hearts should be. And if our hearts are in that place, then we're aligned to do the right things, right? Now, how do you do that? What do you do for your family from now on is to simply say, enough is enough, okay? I'm not going to promote all of the propaganda. I'm not going to listen to any of it, okay, to distract me or to create fear within me. I'm going to go back to reality, compartment 1 or compartment 3 or anything I don't know, I know. I know that I don't know. Right? And simply when you ask yourself, are we safe? Yes, of course. The UAE has done a great job. Or, in all honesty, all of your fear is in your head.
Yeah.
Okay? We do not know of a single person that has been, affected negatively by this, injured. I think there were just in the single figures, people injured. Yeah. Right? We know for a fact, if you look at the data, that they didn't target civilian infrastructure. If you want the reality, we're safe, and to be honest, the traffic is better. Okay, isn't that wonderful? And in a very interesting way, it gets you to think deeply about what is true and what is not. Even the rocket flying in front of you gets you to feel that you're not safe. But am I? Am I safe? And that metacognition, that ability to say, why am I telling myself that I'm not safe when I am? There are no tigers here. I mean, look at you and I. We both drove here. We paid our parking. We came upstairs. We shook hands with so many people. The place is busy, right? And here we are. Truth sets you free. And the truth is, on one side, this is an awakening. Genuinely, I've never in my entire old life seen a moment of awakening like now, okay? Whether it's the Epstein files at the beginning of the year, whether it's all the lies around, the stability of the US dollar and the economy and, all of that. When you dig deep into that, you start to see the truth. The world is starting to wake up, okay? And the world is starting to reject what's wrong. Of course, there has been configurations and setups and so on that are very difficult to tangle, like that ball of wool, right? They're very difficult to untangle, but we will. Now that we see where the red thread is, okay, we will. But we shouldn't submit to the brainwash, and we shouldn't settle for, okay, just make me safe for another few weeks. That's not the way it should be. The way it should be is this needs to end. It needs to end.
Well, so this is a wake-up call. I agree. I think to all of us, and also more so. I mean, you and I, we've talked quite a bit about like AI and the changes that's has been ushering and will continue to do so. And this is a wake-up call in a different sense. And as a mom, I have had to explain to my kids what's going on and what's the sound and why is this hitting that and so on. And you started this conversation by saying we've become hardened, we've lost empathy or compassion. If this is a wake-up call, what would you do as a parent at this point in time? Like maybe what are certain things that we can try to instill in our children at this point that maybe 20 years down the line, they might get up and say, enough is enough. I don't know if we're able to say enough is enough today.
Well, you can. You, that might not mean that you change anything, but you can say it. You can feel it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a parent, right? My daughter's, 30, so not a kid. but we chat all the time, okay? And I hope at my current age, I'm a parent to many others, through my work. And, in a very interesting way, every time I hear a bomb, I say three things, okay? I say, thank God I'm safe, and the ones I love are safe. Because it's a fact. I am safe. There was a bomb, but I'm safe. That really tells your operating system, your entire body, that no. Your amygdala kickstarting your cortisol,
Chill.
This is all over, you're okay. So number one, I'm safe. Number one, I hope every other innocent human is safe. Remember to get that in your heart and teach that to your kids. Every time you hear a bomb, say, I hope every innocent human is safe. Every one of them. I don't want any child anywhere in the world, any innocent woman who is not part of the war, any man who's walking to his work. I don't want anyone to be hurt, okay? Anywhere in the world. And third, which is really interesting, and I hope that bomb gets the evil ones that started it. And I say it in my heart openly, okay? And I may not know who are the true evil ones, but I'm hoping somehow that gets to them, right? And when you really think about it, our kids learn from us, from how we feel. And if this is not how you feel, if your only reaction to this is, oh my God, I hope we're safe, you're scaring them.
Actually, I would say point 3. I wouldn't say I hope it gets to the evil person that deserves it, because I feel that's why we're here today, because obviously evil is subjective, right?
Evil is not subjective.
Depending on which side you're on,
evil is not subjective. No.
You can convince yourself that,
killing a child is evil.
No, absolutely.
Okay? Regardless of which side you're on. Evil is not subjective. Evil with a small e is subjective. Evil with a capital E isn't.
Yes.
Okay? Evil with a small e is someone, was traumatized as a child and, as a result became a criminal. That's evil with a small e, right? That's subjective. The evil with a capital E is systemic. It's systemic. It's like running Google. It's a very big organization with people reporting to people, with plans being put in place, with people carrying OKRs and objectives and executing on them, right? No, that's not subjective. Okay. And once again, the easiest way is to, if you don't mind, I mean, we're close, so I'll say that openly.
Go ahead.
Take that concept of evil is subjective and tell yourself, how was I ever made to believe that?
What I was trying to say is that, depending on where you live in the world and who you are, you might have a different narrative in your mind.
All of them are evil.
That justifies basically whatever you're doing. We talked about that, right?
If they're not pro-humanity at large as one family, with no racism, with no differentiation, with no greed, they're all evil. Okay? And by the way, that doesn't mean that everything that's happening is evil. Understand? So there are many decisions that happen in our world, especially by our leaders, because they're solving a very complex puzzle. Okay? They know that if they did this instead of that, which you might want to do, they would actually harm their own people, right? And so they may make certain decisions that are not perfectly right sometimes. They sometimes make other decisions that are amazing, and the mix of those two are the reality that we live in. But at the end of the day, if they made it with the intention of the good of everyone, that's not evil. Evil is the people that make it with the intention of the good of very few people. Okay? And so my I don't want to, again, I'm speaking my heart, so edit whatever you want out. But the truth is, there is an opportunity to calm our kids down, but there's also an opportunity to hopefully get them to grow up not as numb as we have been. Okay? And, that doesn't mean they need to be aggressive or violent or angry or whatever. It means they need to learn to see the truth. Okay? And the truth is not very difficult to find when you look for it.
Yeah, to question.
Yeah, to question. And by the way, part of the truth is I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, let's talk about what can be done, because it's important for people. So you would get into those kinds of situations, and you and I almost every time find a reason to talk about the feminine and masculine, okay? And you get two very different reactions of the feminine and the masculine when we're in crisis. Okay, the masculine, and again, feminine and masculine are not body parts. So if you, Loulou, lean on your masculine side, you're going to behave in a certain way. If you lean on your feminine side, you're going to behave in a different way. One of my favorite bosses ever used to teach me that when times are tough, we tend to do more of what we know how to do best. Not necessarily the most effective, okay? But what we know how to do best. So we lean on our comfort zone. I call that habitual regression. Habitual regression is when times are tough, you don't address the situation with the best strategy, you address the situation with your best skills. Okay? So the masculine in situations of stress tends to do. Like those people that just quickly run away and rush to the airport or whatever, they are in a state of doing. The feminine is a state of being which has a lot of sensuality in it, a lot of emotions in it, okay? And so usually in times of stress, the feminine would have more emotions, okay? You get a lot of volatility in what you feel. Neither of those is good for you. Neither of those is good for you, right? What is good for you is to, first of all, if you're subjected to someone else who's in their masculine or in their feminine, please understand that this is very instinctive, okay? And so have space for it. When, if your husband is all about, let's do something, let's move, let's, reorganize the home, let's whatever, that's their way of saying, I'm stressed, okay? If your wife is, popping up in volatile emotions, that's her way of saying, I'm stressed, I'm trying to go through this situation, right? And having open space for this, But then what do you do? What you would do starts with, in my mind, a very deep understanding of the value of calm, okay? And it's not, so I normally would ask people and say, if I gave you two choices and you can choose and I'll just make it happen. One is to go through this feeling anxious and the other is to go through it feeling calm. Which would you choose? Nobody will say, make me feel anxious.
Of course.
Right? Calm is a better way of execution. It's a better utilization of your human machine, right? Because simply, if you want the mathematics of it, if you have limited compute and limited memory capacity that you need to analyze the situation, right? Anxiety and worry and all of those stuff, they burn 30, 40, 50% of your brain capacity. Okay, so this is why, as a business leader, if my team comes in and, is panicking about a crisis, the first thing is I do is in the first 10 minutes, I'll tell them, okay, so what's going on, and get them to let it all out. Then the second 10 minutes, I'll say, okay, so what's going right? What is working in our favor? Okay, and then the third 10 minutes, I'll say, what can we do about this? Right? So, the first is emotional, the third is action, but in the middle, there is an exercise of finding the truth. Right? And calm, believe it or not, is very achievable. Okay? Why? Because anxiety, stress, fear, unless there is a bomb landing next to you or a tiger attacking you, is happening in your head.
Yeah.
It's not happening out in the real world. It's your interpretation of the real world. So we spoke about doom scrolling, right? You need to limit that. You need to stop. You can get updated, but what I do is I go to long form. So what I do is I have, several podcasts that talk about geopolitics and economics and so on. And on a daily basis, I'd watch 2 or 3 of them for them to have done the doom scrolling and update me on the actual outcomes. Yeah. Right?
So more context than headlines.
Yeah, exactly. So I want analysis, and I want depth, and I want a conversation, and I want argument, and I want this view and that view. And my limit is very straightforward. I don't watch, in times of crisis, I don't watch anything that's shorter than 50 minutes. Okay? Yes, I do scroll, early in the morning. I do scroll a little bit in the evening just to find out if there is anything new. But as I said, the minute I start to get the same thing 3 times, it's done.
Anyway, in short form, you also know it's designed to get your attention in an unhealthy way.
Correct. Yeah. So two things happen. One is you're no longer incessantly, ingesting information, and the second is you're actually getting insight. Okay. So this is the first thing. The second thing, which I believe is really important, is what Franklin, what was his name? Covey.
The 7 Habits of Effective People.
So he really popularized it, but it's a Stoic teaching from the ancient Greek times, which is known as the dichotomy of control. Okay, he used to call it your area of influence and area of control. The dichotomy of control is an understanding and an acknowledgement that not everything's within your control. Yeah. Right? And that wasting brain cycles, it's all about your resources. You're wasting brain cycles on things that are in your area of
not in your control.
Not in your area of what was it? Influence or control. Anyway, that are not within your control is not only making you spin out, but it's also wasting your brain cycles, which you can utilize doing something useful that you can control. Right? And so when you've started from what do you want, right? Then went through the cycle of, and what is the truth? What is the data that feeds me so that I can decide what I want? Very interestingly, one of the exercises I do very, very often in crisis is I take a paper and pen and write down everything that's concerning me, 50 things, right? And then literally highlight them red and green. This is within my area of control. This is not, right? These are things I can influence. These are things I cannot. Okay, whatever they are. The UAE will run out of food. Fine. Okay, if it's within your area of control, if it's within your area of concern. So if it's concerning you, by the way, area of concern and area of influence. If it's concerning you, and you genuinely believe it's concerning you, it's green. You can do something about it. Buy 4 cans of tuna. Fine. Right? And the minute you do that, you take it out of what I normally call brain time and practical time. Very, very important hack. Okay? When your stress is related to something that's not in the present moment, something in the past or something in the future, in our case, most of it is in the future. Is the future going to be safe? Okay? What you need to do is your brain tends to process that in what's known as brain time, or I used the term in my first book. Brain time is an incessant cycle of trying to analyze that situation over and over and over until it's solved. Repeatedly, incessantly, it's like white noise in the background. Okay? Practical time is to turn every future concern into a plan. Even if the plan is not perfect, you turn the future concern into a plan. Okay, so my close family, my ex Ali, Nibel, my ex-wife, my daughter, both live here in the UAE, and we said, look, after Eid, if it's still here, we're gonna convene again and decide if we want to leave. Okay, that might be the worst plan or the best plan in history. It doesn't matter.
There's a decision on that.
But there is a plan, so that topic doesn't come up in our conversation anymore. Do you understand? And so turning things from brain time to practical time. And by the way, just for the sake of it, if it's in the past, you turn it into learning and you stop.
You archive it.
You archive it, right? So this is really important. Understanding the dichotomy of control genuinely frees you up from 80% of what you're struggling with. Okay, the trick though is to accept what's not within your control. Right, so there is an emotional overflooding, is what I call it.
Yeah.
Okay, when you're spinning out, you tend, if you're a doer, you tend to overdo everything. Like you'd even work more in the times where things are uncertain. Okay, and if you're emotional and you're struggling with emotional regulation, all emotions pop up. Okay, because remember, what happens is every emotion you've ever felt is either processed or suppressed, and suddenly, because it's almost as if the gravity of the situation leads you to an overflood of opening your heart, everything comes out. Okay? And so that's absolutely normal. And now all of this is wonderful. It's all opportunities to reflect and to sit with yourself and say, seriously, how effective am I in protecting myself and my family? And another thing that I have to say people genuinely miss the opportunity of is oxytocin. So you see, cortisol and adrenaline, if you just look at the human machine as a machinery, okay, the way stress works is very biological. It's almost like an internal combustion engine. It's exactly systemic every single time. Your unaware system, your amygdala, detects a threat. It triggers your a very long cycle that basically eventually ends up in your adrenal glands, and your adrenal glands pour cortisol into your bloodstream, right? And the cortisol, may lead to adrenaline if there is a fight or flight response needed, but that hormone cocktail basically is there to reconfigure you into superhuman, right? So if if you needed to run because there was an actual threat, we've reconfigured your body so that most of your energy can go to your muscles, right? And so on. That reconfiguration is almost mechanical, biologically, yes, but it's almost mechanical. There are other processes in the human body that also are mechanical. A hug will give you oxytocin. Simple as that. And remember, we always spoke about safety is not related to how intelligent we are, how well we're doing. It's always related to, are we in a community that's standing for us? So, I can genuinely tell you that one of the things that parents should do, instead of trying to explain the situation to their little kids, is hug them. Okay? It's biologically 100% bulletproof, no pun intended, right? And simply, works every time. And in a very interesting way, it's an opportunity. When things slow down a little bit. I mean, I used to, again, my brain is weird, but when COVID was happening and everyone was complaining about not being out there, partying and so on, to me, it was an opportunity to be with someone I really loved, right? With closeness, with enough space for me to write, for enough space with me. This is when I wrote Scary Smart, for example, which I think have made a big dent in the AI world, right? And it's again, it's an opportunity. It is the ability to deal with the world as it is, instead of complaining that the world is not what you want it to be. Okay? And that's, by the way, is called growing up. Children, when there are things that are happening that they don't like, they, stab their feet and they cry. Okay? We're not 6-year-olds anymore. Yeah. Right? Simply, when things happen that we don't like, we look at the situation, we analyze it, we say, how can I make it better? How can I make it better for me by being rational, being analytical, being emotional, but processing my emotions in a regulated way? Or how can I be there for others? How can I call my daughter, check in on her, send her a joke, hug her? Okay, if a friend is spinning out a little bit, be there for them. And if a friend invites me to share my views, say the truth so that people, hear us.
Okay. So if I had to sum it up, I guess we are, let's see, trying to remember the beginning of this conversation.
That was a flood of information. I apologize.
No, I think I want to maybe leave the audience, the people who are listening now, again, who might be dealing with whatever's going on in different ways, is that not everything is in your control. Try to...
Almost nothing is. Very little.
Accept that there is no black and white, and there are things that are in the middle that maybe you should educate yourself more on to try to get to the truth. And it's important not to lose our humanity in the process. It's important to wish for a better world where there is no war across borders everywhere. It's a wake-up call for all of us to rethink and maybe try to understand why we've been numbed and hardened for such a long time.
Please.
It's an opportunity for us to look at our information diet and see and understand that the 5 to 10 second clips we're seeing on social media are designed to aggravate us. And that perhaps the best way to get the right context is to look at, long form, long podcasts where there is more context and more research and analysis.
And no heightened emotions.
Yeah, and no drama.
No heightened emotions. So if you see a very long podcast of someone very angry and cursing and
I guess we don't want to fall for the hook.
You're looking for truth. You're looking for truth in those hazy times. You're looking for truth, and I always attempted to, because my life in business, I very rarely ever ran a steady business. I always built a business in a very confusing time, a new product, whatever, and then when it became stable, I became bored and I handed it over. And I used to teach my teams. I used to say, when you're in times of uncertainty, treat your life as a quest, not a journey. This is a massive difference. And this is a very, very important skill in the time that we're in right now. A journey is, you and your husband say, so we're going to take the kids to France on, July 17th until the 27th. And then you say, no, I can't do the 27th. It's the 26th. And everything is pre-planned and which hotel and which car you're renting. And right? That's a journey. A quest is you're in the fog. You're in the dark. You're in an uncharted territory, which, by the way, is exactly where the world is today. What you do, you take one step forward, you look left and right, you assess the next step, then you take another step. Then sometimes you may take a step back and go left and then take another step and so on. It's when you're in a quest, it's all about your ability to say, I'm not going to try to control the world. I'm going to control my passage through the world.
My next step, maybe.
My next step or two. And there's always that ability to assess and reconvene and discuss and agree and so on and so forth. So in my mind, this is a massive difference for people who are, who value control and routine and predictability. They struggle heavily in this. For me, it's like, another startup, right? It is very, very natural to the way I operated my whole life to work through uncertainty. And it's simple. Huh? If you're safe where you are right now, take one step forward, check that you're safe, check for all alternative passages that you can take, then take another step to the left, then and so on, or 2 steps or 1 step and so on, and be flexible, responding to the realities that you find out. Very, very different than just saying, okay, let's plan this out.
Yeah. You did mention at the beginning of the conversation as well that this is that there could be a lot of opportunities that arise 100%. Out of the situation, especially for entrepreneurs that are listening now.
100%.
That in times of uncertainty, I think maybe the people that can adapt in the way that you're describing could ultimately benefit from the opportunities that will arise.
Countless opportunities. I mean, you have to think about it with certainty. Huh? Mathematically, either this is going to go really, really, really bad, so it doesn't matter what your effort is, okay? Or it's not, and it's going to come back, and it's always come back. And when it comes back, those who have made the correct decisions find themselves in a good place.
Is there a better way of looking at things? I mean, because you touched now on something important, because yes, at least in my mind, right, this could get really bad.
Correct.
Like we could all die.
100%,
if it gets
80%.
really, really bad, yeah. Like my husband, for example, he wouldn't even put that scenario. Like, what's
Correct.
the point? So do you have maybe a formula or a framework for that? Like, should you even put the negative scenario as a scenario?
Area of influence and area of concern.
Okay.
And address things that you are concerned about positively. So it's very simple. Yes, there is in my calculation, there is a 15% chance that someone is going to do something really weird in a couple of weeks' time or in a month's time or whatever. And, it's going to affect the entire world.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I cannot control that 15%. I may be able to control it if this, podcast goes super viral and 400 million people see it, and they stand in front of the White House. But that's, very unlikely. What I know is it's not within my area of control. It's not within my area of influence. And if it's not within my area of influence, why should I waste brain cycles on it? Okay. Instead, I invest brain cycles in it positively. Okay. If something really bad could happen in 3 weeks' time, I might as well hug my daughter daily, every day of those 3 weeks. Okay. I might as well invest heavier in my ice cream machine and make ice creams that actually have sugar in, right? It is a very interesting way of looking at it. It's not within my control, but it's now within my ability to design the rest of my life based on it. Based on, again, I know this is really weird the way my brain works, but every decision you make that's not on certainty should be based on probability. And the whole idea is when we are analyzing a ton of inputs in a situation of uncertainty, what normally ends up happening is we treat all of them equally. No, they're not equal.
So think about probability.
100%. Okay. And I did that math with a few of my friends and my daughter. I basically calculated the probability of a debris landing on my apartment during the times of the interceptions and so on. It's less than dying on an airplane. If you just calculate the square area of Dubai and the number of rockets and the probability that this thing lands on my apartment. Yes, of course, it lands on someone's apartment, but what is the probability of that? And if it's lower than than dying on an aeroplane, I should probably stop flying before I ever fear this. Do you understand? And those things just anchor you in compartment one. Everything you want, all the success in decisions and uncertainty, to bring things to compartment one. Is to say, I know that is true. Or I know that this has a 10% chance of being true. Or I know that this has 17% chance of being true. And accordingly, what am I going to do about it? Okay. In your business, you look at this and you say, I know for a fact that the market is going to decline a little bit, right? There is no doubt about that. This is a 99% probability. Now, from there onwards, for example, if you look at every crash in the real estate market in the UAE since, freehold started to happen, it crashes for 7 months and then it recovers. And then it, overshoots the original support level. Okay? And so, there is data. You can say to yourself, there is a 100% probability that it will happen. Yeah. There is a 10% probability that it will recover in a month, but a 90% probability it will recover in 7 or 8. Okay? And that's it. And, it's all about stopping the madness and just genuinely putting the things that matter down. And so I'm asking people every time they scroll and they see a rocket that hits or misses, to say, I really, in my heart, pray for that to end. Yeah. I pray for it to end so that my kids grow up in a world where they don't have to deal with that anymore. And it is possible, I promise you. It's the first time in my lifetime where I actually believe it's possible. It is possible that there will be a change that happens as a result of this. Okay?
Let's hope so.
I totally believe it.
Let's hope so. Thank you so much, Mo, for doing this on such a short notice.
Oh my God, I'm very grateful that you have me here. Thank you.
Thank you.